What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm the Croc Nick.
I'm Jammin John.
And we have an album review for you, and one that I've been eager to go over because I feel like we just did this not too long ago.
Yeah.
But it's for a different album. So we are going to go over the latest offering from Cavalera, or Cavalera Conspiracy. If you're looking on the archives, that's where you'll find this, even though the conspiracy part is definitely not on the album cover. But we're going to go over their latest re-recording of a classic Sepultura album with Schizophrenia. This comes out on the 21st of June on Nuclear Blast Records. Now, Cavalera Conspiracy formed in 2007 in Arizona. I mean, we already went over the history of Sepultura in our ranking. And yeah, we were very curious about this one, namely because it's another like early favorite from Sepultura here. This is technically, though, Cavalera Conspiracy's sixth album, even if it's a Sepultura album, whatever, I don't know, put an asterisk by it. So, of course, we actually went over the last two re-recordings when they did Bestial Devastation and Morbid Visions. I thought they did a fantastic job on that, kind of, shedding new light on some old classics there and kind of giving them, like, just an even more vicious, in a different way sort of vibe.
Giving him more life, so to speak. You know, great albums back then, but being able to hear them the way that I think they wanted people to hear them was a treat. And
I had the same feeling for Schizophrenia. I love that album. I think it has some absolutely essential songs in terms of Sepultura's amazing discography, but I've never been a huge fan of the production. I always found it like very muddy, and just the levels were kind of odd, and like vocal filters and the way the drums sound. There were a lot of things to pick apart, but underneath all that kind of scuzzy, muddy production were absolutely killer songs.
Yep.
And this album in particular marked a big shift in Sepultura's sound. This was the first one they had with Andreas Kisser on lead guitars, and it's kind of night and day in terms of comparing it to Bestial Devastation and Morbid Visions. The songs became more intricate, more dynamic. The riff work was just really all over the place, and this band, I think, really kind of embraced a lot more of the thrash tropes. And musically, I saw this as like a big coming out party for the band, because you listen to the music on this versus the first two, it's just, again, night and day. This band was definitely trying to show off that they weren't just some kids that could just kind of grind out some just, proto death metal with like a lot of Celtic Frost influence. This band wanted to just, completely wow you with like killer songwriting. So needless to say, I mean, if you watch the review, we love the last two re-recordings. And again, that's kind of like the opposite of how I feel about re-recordings, which kind of threw me for a loop. But I was kind of wondering, could they do it for a third time? And I think one of the elements that I think was essential to those first two that is returning here is one, Arthur Risk. Arthur Risk handles the mix and master, and his approach to production, I've become a huge fan of his production. He knows how to give bands like a very retro sound, like, gritty, dirty sounding, but it also sounds more polished and just dense and heavy. And he has, once again, done an awesome makeover on here.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. We're used to reviewing albums that we've never heard before. And it's kind of hard to go over a record that we've heard many, many times before and nitpick it. And in this case, it's an old record, just with the levels, I think, where the band wanted them to be initially. Back in the 80s, they didn't have things like money or a great studio or great equipment to work with. They were just like, screw it, we're going to go in and record, push record. All right, we recorded. Sounds meh. It's fine. We're going to release it. But yeah, Arthur knows how to kind of tweak everything to make it sound modernized yet original.
Yeah, and like key elements I think were focused on here, like namely the guitars, stripping off a layer of mud and just giving them a hefty crunch, because the guitars in here are just crunchy and magnificent. And, with this album, again, compared to the earlier albums, like when they put out Morbid Visions and Bestial Devastation, I think the idea was to sound raw and just gross. I don't think this was the production that they really wanted for Schizophrenia, though. Again, I think they wanted to showcase the fact that they became better musicians, and the songs were, again, much more dynamic, but they kind of had the same production approach as they did on the earlier albums. And this is before Scott Burns came down and lended a helping hand to really kind of light up their sound a bit. But much like those last two re-recordings, I think one of the most important elements, outside of, again, Arthur Risk coming back, because I think he's quite essential, is the band itself and where they are today and like coming back to this material with fresh eyes and just renewed vigor. And I feel that 100% on here. Again, other re-recordings, I don't always feel that. Like when Exodus re-recorded Bonded by Blood. Totally not essential. Like one of the most skippable things in their discography next to Force of Habit. I'm still not a fan. But that one just felt like they were trying to re-record it just, I don't know, maybe to get the rights back or something like that. Like if they had a re-recording, you know, that might actually play into it. But it didn't come off as like, you know, with that same level of intensity as it was initially recorded. And that's very important with thrash metal. And with this band, there's always been this element of death thrash, especially in their earlier stuff. And with RIFFS production on here, I think the death metal elements really shine, mainly because the guitars are so much more crunchy, and the drums finally sound the way that I've always wanted them to.
The problems I had with the drums on the original recording is they were present, but there was no punch to them. The drums overall sounded kind of thin. The cymbals sounded kind of chimey. It's like they were there, but they weren't there. If that makes any sense.
I mean, it kind of does. Like, all right, I would say that there wasn't any like dynamic range to them, because some things would be like way too loud on the kit versus others. One of my main issues, and it's even present on the remaster, so, you know, even if you have the remaster of Schizophrenia, I still feel like there's like some audio problems there. The big one being, I feel like they only mic'd one kick drum, because, you know, if you play that with the bass up, you'll notice that one kick drum is, well, decidedly louder than the other one, so you get this like weird effect, and it never quite settles in, especially when they're doing like, you know, double time drums. Like when they're doing like the single kick, you know, like thrashy blasts, it's fine. Like it's not really noticeable. Like it doesn't have like the most like resounding punch. Like if you compare that production to Beneath the Remains definitely got it right. But that has always been one of my biggest issues with the drums. That and like, you know, sometimes the open concert toms, they would be just super muffled. Other times they would be much more loud. And, I mean, also, you know, it had kind of a muddy, indistinct bass on it, too.
Yep, but not anymore. Now they sound natural, punchy, beefy. I mean, Igor's always beat the shit out of the drums, but, like, every hit, every strike, every punch is just rock solid. And it sits really nicely in the mix, too. Like, it's not overpowering. There's no special effects on the drums. There's no added magic. It sounds like it did pretty much, like, in the studio. Like, just here, we're going to mic these and play, and it's going to sound just like you hear it.
And the fact that the bass isn't so muddy in there, too. Like, there's not as much bleed over. And I like the crisp kind of clarity on this album, but again, it still has, like, discernible grit. You can hear it on the guitars, especially. Like, they're just kind of extra chunky sounding, where it's not like the most clean, you know, like chug every time. And vocally, Max really recaptures the vibe pretty well, albeit his vocals have changed over the years. One of my issues with the original was the weird vocal filter that Max had on there. Like, it just sounded, I don't know, like he was like yelling in an auditorium. This one, you know, reverb's always been a big part of, like, you know, that kind of like death thrash or even just like death metal sound. Here, I think the reverb occasionally gets jacked up a little bit too high, but for the most part, it kind of settles in like this natural kind of more atmospheric sound where it kind of carries over just enough to make the vocals sound a little bit more sinister. And Max's vocals are a lot more clear on here. They, again, don't sound very muddied up, and he's not like super out front in the mix. Like that's another thing that I kind of had an issue with Schizophrenia, where the vocals were kind of out front, and it would be different if like the vocals sounded like well recorded, but they didn't. Here they sound well recorded, but they moved them back in the mix. And honestly, they contribute to a lot of the atmosphere here, which the atmosphere is kind of the same. It's, again, just kind of better. Like the more like lush sections where it's supposed to sound spooky and sinister, where, you know, kind of really didn't before, it actually feels more dark and foreboding in those spots. Like, this is a little bit different from the rip, where it actually has an intro on it, and Gone is the psycho kind of intro in the original, which, I mean, I kind of like that. It was a novelty. It was like, yeah, this is a scary movie.
Right.
Who doesn't love Psycho? The intro on here kind of has the same effect, though. I mean, it's still spooky, it's atmospheric, and it is punctuated by a giant roar, and then, of course, you are off to From the Past Come the Storms, which is still like one of my favorites.
And then into To the Wall, I gotta say, in the original recording, to me, it always just sounded like a tremolo riff. Like you could still hear, some riffs at some times or some chugs at some times, but a majority of the guitars, at least on the original recording, to me sounded like one just like lengthy tremolo riff, which was fine. But in this case, with the added, let's say, charm or magic of the re-recording, you can hear all the picking patterns, which I've never been able to really fully hear. And there were just a lot of nuances I picked up on, but there is a crazy picking pattern into the wall. There's a bunch of like triplet tags that I never noticed.
Yeah, I've been listening to that album, God, since I was a teenager, which was a very, very, very long time ago. And honestly, there are things in here that, again, I just couldn't hear in the original mix, because I had the original version for a long time, and I played it to the point where if you held the CD up to the light, it would look like a disco ball because all the light was pouring through. Yeah, I didn't treat my CDs all that well, but I listened to them a lot. But even on the remaster, you can't necessarily make out like all the intricacies in the picking. Here, you can hear every chug, every nuance, and that's especially important on this one in particular because this is where Andreas joined the team, and you got like way more intricate lead work. The first two offerings with Basic Devastation and More Revisions, the lead work is very raw, it's a lot of dive bombs, it's meant to sound sinister and evil. Andreas definitely had more melody to his playing style, and he was just really wild with all his wah effects, the tapping. There was so much more that he brought to the table, and here Travis Stone does an amazing job imitating him, which again, I don't associate him with all the lavish lead playing just because I know him from Noisem. And Noisem is vicious grindcore. Lead play is almost not allowed in grindcore. And here he is doing all of Andreas' stuff to pretty much perfection here.
Yeah, I think Travis was a definite good pick. Especially in R.I.P. Rest in Pain, dude. That instant hooky riff right in the beginning, it just... Again, everything shines on this record. Being able to hear it all helps up the intensity of things and just helps up the experience of this. It's weird because it sounds nothing like the original, yet everything like the original.
Yeah, the saying, you put a fresh coat of paint on this thing, and honestly, that's the effect you get here. You have a fresh coat of paint on something that, might have been called a little bit rusty and kind of... dirty or whatever. I know that there are definitely fans of the earlier production and, going all the way back to the beginning of Sepultura. That was always kind of a bone of contention with me. But here, with this fresh coat of paint, you can see every detail in this whatever thing you painted. Car, house, barn, I don't give a fuck. You can see it. It doesn't matter. But if this was a hypothetical car that got the fresh coat of paint in my dumb metaphor, underneath the hood is still an absolutely raging, furious engine. And that's the thing. I don't want this to lose anything. And I feel in a lot of re-recordings, there is something lost in the process. And with these, this included with the other ones, I don't feel as though anything is lost. In fact, I think it's still approached with the same level of rage and vigor.
Oh, 100%. It sounded like they had fun recording it, to be honest. You can hear that in the songs. It somehow comes across as older gentlemen recreating the magic of an early recording and just going all out with it. It is super intense. It is just a non-stop pummeling, at all times. And it was originally too, but with this new polished sound, it's got, just hey, fuck you.
Yeah, and I mean, I like the idea of falling in love again with older songs that, again, just have a little bit more shine to them. Escape to the Void, one of my personal favorites, always will be, but Inquisition Symphony has always been probably my favorite instrumental track by Sepultura, and honestly, I would probably put it top 10 tracks ever by Sepultura. And hearing it with this more gritty but more polished production, making out every single killer riff in there, because that song is a 6.5 minute riff farm. It sounds absolutely amazing, and this is definitely one where I feel you can hear kind of that death metal side come out a little bit. And that was something that's kind of carried over from the last one, that more proto death metal sound that they had really comes out in this production and comes out in this more aggressive playing, or at least the same aggressive playing, you can just hear it better.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, better comparison, the sound of this album reflects the album art. It's the same art, it's just more detailed and more lavish.
There you go.
You know, I have no issues with the original art. In fact, that's, you know, up there with one of my favorite Sepultura album covers. It's just kind of uniquely spooky, but here, seeing all those extra details, I mean, Eleron Cantor, that dude does amazing album covers, and you know, the last Cavalera ones were awesome too. Now, one big thing that's different on here is this actually features a new track. Now, on the original version, or at least the version that I had back when I was a teenager of Schizophrenia, there was a re-recording of Troops of Doom. Now, that would be pretty redundant since they've already re-recorded that. So they threw on what we think is a new track, or it could be an old track that they just never recorded, but there's new music here.
Yeah, Nightmares of Delirium, instant hook, and it really, to be honest with you, it sounds like it belongs on this record. It may just be something forgotten in time that they were like, oh yeah, this was supposed to be the last track, but we could only afford to record 9 songs.
Yeah, I mean, our studio time ran out. It's like, we got one more. It's like, no, you don't.
Yep, got some really rad riffs in it, some really killer tremolo harmonies that definitely stand out, again, I think a lot more than it would have in 1987. And Igor, fucking Igor, and those big drum turnovers, it caps off the experience of this re-recording and the intensity of everything by throwing one more nasty punch.
Yeah, it does sound like a little bit more like raw and straightforward, but I absolutely dug it. And again, it's done in that same year. Like, they were kind of just in that same headspace, and maybe this was one that they'd just been like working on as just Cavalera, and it's like, you know what? I don't think people would know whether or not this was recorded, like, you know, a few weeks ago or like back in 1987 or 86. It has the essence, and that is, you know, the most important thing on here. As far as any negatives on here, I mean, minor nitpicking. I do think occasionally there is like a little bit too much reverb on Max's vocals, but you know, it's one of those weird things where I feel like, you know, my nitpicks of this album would be nitpicks I had of the original Schizophrenia, which, you know, in our ranking was a little bit lower just because of the production. It's still one of my favorite albums, and yeah, it's one of my favorite albums again, I guess. This is an awesome re-recording, and I'm just gonna say it right here. Stop with this one. We should be good now. There's no need to do Beneath the Remains or Arise.
Right. Don't touch them.
Don't touch them. They're already perfect. But this one, you could definitely make an argument where it needed like a little bit of a makeover. And I think they did an awesome job with that. And again, capture that same essence. This should be where they kind of halt things, though, on re-recording. Like, this is the only other one that I could say, hey, maybe that one could use like, you know, a little bit of a touch-up. But yeah, overall, I'm going to give this 4 stars. I enjoyed the hell of it, much like I enjoyed the hell out of it almost 40 years ago. God, that's a big number. I still get the same vibes I do from the original on this one, and that is important. Like, this doesn't feel like a polished, super cleaned up version of it. It's still gritty. It's still mean. It still has every ounce of aggression that the original did. It just sounds a bit better, or a lot better. Depends on what your preference is for production. Some like it more muddy and raw, some like it slightly cleaned up, but also still gritty. You can listen to either one. Both options are out there. I recommend checking this one out. I think, again, they recaptured the vibe, the whole era, the sound, every just pretty much detail that I wanted to hear come out is present here. Even the, you know, redone artwork, I think, is fantastic. Just check this out. If you're a big fan of Schizophrenia and the original, I think you're probably still going to really dig this. But again, I know, like, you know, re-recordings are kind of dicey with people, but again, I'm generally not a fan of re-recordings, and I dug this, so check it out.
I'm going to leave this short and sweet because our camera's going to overheat. That rhymed. I'm going to give it 4 stars. I liked the original Schizophrenia. I like this new re-recording. My problems with the initial Schizophrenia was I hated the mix. Now that's fixed. That rhymes again. God damn it, I'm on fire. Yeah, it just sounds better. Not that it sounded bad before, but man, being able to hear all the nuances and the guitars, and it just sounds beefy and punchy and intense. And I think, again, that this is the way maybe that they wanted it to sound initially, but they just couldn't get there. Now they've got it. I don't have any gripes beyond that. I don't even think that having that much reverb on Max's vocals was a bad thing necessarily. If anything, it helps add to the atmosphere a little bit. But it still sounds killer. It just sounds like a polished version of killer. Like you took a rag and you wiped down the mirror and now you can actually see yourself. And that's kind of where this album's at. So
you're wearing a hockey mask.
Right.
And you got a machete because you're killer.
I recommend checking this out. They've done a good job re-recording albums. And I agree with Nick. Don't re-record anymore. Please don't touch Beneath the Remains or Arise.
Just be done.
Just don't. Just, we love you guys. We respect you. But don't re-record it anymore. But this is a banger. Definitely check this out for yourself.
So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there. It is also in our channel up in the banner in the bottom right-hand corner. But if you're looking for Thralls Metal stuff, you have to go to thrallsmetal.com. We have t-shirts, both old and new. The old ones are discounted, provided we have your size. And we even have hats. So if you're looking for any of that stuff, click the link down below.
Tons of stuff going on at Thralls of Metal. Album reviews, of course. States of Metal. Is it metal? Is it not metal? Discography rankings. We're going to do Meshuggah next. Should be coming up relatively soon. Hard to get 5 guys together in time schedules and whatnot. Anyway, we do all this stuff because of you guys. We genuinely appreciate you. We thank you to all of our subscribers, our family, our friends, everybody that makes Thralls of Metal into a really magical experience. Because that's where we're at now. We thank you. We appreciate you. Nick, thank him again.
Yeah, you guys absolutely rule, and we're looking forward to overloading you with more content in the future. So one more big thank you because you guys are awesome.
Thank you.
And we will catch you later.